Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Good evening. Ambassador, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, it's my great pleasure to welcome you to the Baker Institute this evening for a discussion on Europe and the U.S.-European relationship. This evening's event could not be timelier. Europe today faces a number of major challenges stemming from national and transnational political movements, economic uncertainty, and a refugee crisis. There is a basic tension rising between the concept of the European Union and nationalist proclivities. A key example, of course, is Brexit. Here in the United States, we have a new administration in Washington, which is in the process of defining its foreign policy strategy, including our relationship with Europe. So the decisions surrounding the issues I mentioned will affect the continent and the transatlantic relationships for years to come. With long-standing trade and security ties, the United States shares many concerns with Europe. Robust U.S.-European relations have been a hallmark of our foreign policy under Democratic and Republican administrations, and they're critical to resolving the international crises and achieving shared goals. But too often, as you all well know in the past, effective cooperation has been difficult to achieve. There is a need for a meaningful, pragmatic dialogue to reach effective and mutually agreeable outcomes in areas of shared interest with our European friends. So we're very fortunate this evening to have our speaker, Ambassador Szemerkényi, with us tonight. The ambassador's full biography is in your program. You can see she's had a very illustrious career. But it goes without saying that the political, economic, and security challenges facing Europe have been her area of focus for many years. She has served as Hungary's ambassador to the United States since 2015, for which she held a number of very important foreign affairs assignments in the Hungarian government and has served also in the private sector and academia. So please join me in welcoming Ambassador Szemerkényi.
Ladies and gentlemen, dear friends, if I may say how pleased I am to be here and how much I appreciate the opportunity of discussing with you tonight some of the most pressing challenges that I think we all face in Europe, and some of the challenges that I'm sure, as a security policy person, that is not going to stay within the boundaries of Europe, and we will have to focus on these challenges together. So I very much appreciate this opportunity and the attention and interest in these questions, because I very much believe in dialogue, in understanding each other's situation better, and this is exactly why I thought it was going to be a wonderful opportunity for us tonight to go through these challenges. What I very much appreciate in particular is to have this opportunity today, because I am the first woman ambassador from Hungary posted to the United States, and today is International Women's Day. And although that was not the point of the timing, but the reason I know that it is International Women's Day, because I wouldn't otherwise, is that we were invited to the White House for today by the First Lady Melania Trump for today, and that's what reminded us that this is a special day. But I think it's a wonderful opportunity to discuss these issues, because the way we look at the world from Europe is worth considering from here. If you think about the United States, we all know why the United States is so special. It's a unique nation and it's a unique country. And there's a number of reasons for this, for which we very much respect the United States. Hungary, seen from here, very, very far out there, is also a unique nation, because it is situated in the middle of Central Europe, surrounded in the north by Slavic nations, the Poles, the Belarusians, Russians, Ukraine, in the south as well. of course, the Balkan countries. On the other hand, on the other side, it's surrounded by Austria, Germany, Switzerland, German-speaking languages, nations. And Hungary is neither Slavic nor Germanic, so it's really unique. It has a special root, which makes it very different from the rest of the region, but very cooperative, because that is what has been leading our history, to be able to understand the neighboring cultures and nations and peoples, and to be able to interact with them. So, to start our little discussion today, I thought of starting on a lighter note. Because we Hungarians, with this little uniqueness that we have in our history and in our culture, we believe that we have contributed to the United States in many significant ways. And I'm destined to make this a little show for you. We think that the reason why we have managed to survive all these challenges that throughout the centuries in the middle of Europe is our understanding and our commitment to creativity. And so what have been the major investments contributed to global knowledge and sophistication by Hungarians? Here's a quick list of this. Sparkling water, modestly, the electric engine and the unipolar inductor was invented by János Ányos Jedlik, a Hungarian guy. The carburetor was invented by two Hungarian guys, Donát Bánki and János Csonka. Ford T-model, believe it or not, was developed by József Galamb and Jenő Farkas, two Hungarian engineers. Vitamin C, wow, was developed by Albert Szent-Györgyi. Yet another very important Hungarian contribution to global welfare. The automatic gear shift and the ballpoint pen were invented by this person up there, László Bíró, which is why the Brits insist on calling the ballpoint pen to the biro. So it has a meaning for this. Computer, quantum mechanics, and game theory was invented, and a very important element of these inventions was contributed by János Neumann. Holography was invented by a Hungarian person, Dénes Gábor. Rubik's Cube. For global welfare, right? Rubik is actually the name of the person who invented this thing, and he is a very famous Hungarian. And of course, Charles Simonyi, who continues to live in the United States, who designed Word and Excel, and traveled to the space. iGo navigation system, some of you may use it, it's very popular in Europe as well, were invented by a Hungarian guy also, Péter Balog. And the presentation that I use now is a special new way, rather than using slides. This is the name of it is Prezi. It was also invented by three Hungarian inventors. This is the way to look at Prezi. But it's not the end of the story. We have very strongly contributed to American culture as well. At the beginning of Hollywood, many Hungarians influenced the birth of American filmmaking and the film industry. These studios, for instance, Paramount was launched by Adolf Cukor, a Hungarian person, 20th Century Fox, Vilmos Fried, Universal Pictures, Pasternak Jakab, famous Hungarian directors, Sándor Korda, Kertész Mihály, Steven Spielberg, other very famous personalities with Hungarian roots. Béla Lugosi was the first and most important face of playing Dracula. Johnny Weissmuller, of Hungarian background, he played Tarzan in the 1930s. Some of us will still remember. Tony Curtis, of course. Kertész Tamás. In Hungarian. Paul Newman has a Hungarian background, just so that you know. Peter Falk has also a Hungarian background. Columbo is of Hungarian origin. And of course, Captain Kirk in Star Trek, Danny Crane in Boston Legal is William Shatner, also of Hungarian background. Believe it or not, Goldie Hawn and Kate Hudson, Jerry Seinfeld, Drew Barrymore, Rachel Weisz, Adrian Brody, and The Simpsons. The Simpsons, as an important contribution of Hungarians to American culture, if I may say, was very much involved an animator, Gábor Csupó, who contributed to the success of The Simpsons. And the interesting part of it is that back in 2000, there was a part of an episode in Simpsons which talked about American elections. And who was Gábor Csupó picking for a winner in the American elections? Donald Trump. That's what he drew in 2000. So I think future telling is also one of our specialties. So I think these are some of the elements that I think we are very humbly but very proud of. And of course, there is a very important part that link our two societies closely. And I would like to go briefly through these past few years on the basis of these past contributions, because we very much believe that our experience of the past few years is really worth mentioning. One of the biggest challenge, of course, was the economic challenge of 2008, and in Hungary, as a result of the economic challenges and the economic pressures, most of the economic and financial analyses of the country's position were saying that in 2010, although Greece was going to be the first country in the European Union to collapse in its economic policies, the second country after that was going to be Hungary. That was the general predictions by London and many of the American analysts. And what we have tried to do is to introduce a new economic policy, a new Hungarian model, if I may say, on the basis of which what we have seen some organizational structural changes in the economic decision-making of the country, some regulatory improvements that were fundamentally important to make it a more competitive economy and to focus on reducing unemployment and increasing the employment rate, reducing inflation, and increasing the foreign direct investment into the country. So we wanted to create a competitive economy and a very clearly investor-friendly environment. As a result of which, what we can see now is that we have the third year in a row in which our budget deficit has been pushed under 3%. We have an economic growth predicted for this coming year, 3.4%. Our inflation rate is under 1%. Unemployment rate went down to 4.9%. And so the Greek and the Hungarian economies' trajectories have very much diverse, and we're very proud of this humbly called Hungarian model. Of course, there's a series of fundamental structural changes that we had to introduce, but the results are also showing we have managed to increase exports, FDI per person, and the GDP growth also in Hungary. So we're very solidly standing on a firm growth trajectory among the European Union countries. Of course, in 2016, what we could see was these trends to continue to be very positive. And I think in particular in the Hungarian-American relations, this gives us a very good grounds to believe that although we have good numbers and good figures that link our countries, we have growth, an area to grow, but the U.S. has become, as a result of these changes, the #1 investor into Hungary after the European Union countries, which I think is a very important message about our relations. And also the American markets have become the #1 target market for Hungarian exports after the European Union countries. And I think it is a fundamentally positive message. We say it in Hungary that what matters is really who you fight with and where you put your money into. That's how you can see who your friends are. And in terms of the financial and business relations between our two countries, we have very positive trends and figures. And in terms of our strategic cooperation, we're together fighting in Afghanistan. We're having the largest per capita contribution to the fight against ISIL. So we are very strongly working together. But in terms of the American companies' presence in Hungary, what you can see is that we established strong, special strategic partnerships with these American companies. And of course, there is still room to grow. I think, we have this very strong business message. We call this the Hungarian model. But I chose this picture because she is a Hungarian model on the front of L. And I think it's a very powerful proof to the Hungarian model that as a result of this, what you could see in 2015, Hungary was called the best country to invest in the entire Central East European region, which I think is a very important indication of the restructuring of the economy and of the profound structural changes that we were undertaking in the past 10 years. Of course, we have future plans. We are a country of investors. And so what do we want to focus on? We want to focus on increasing the digitalization of the country. So we launched the Digital Hungary plan, and we want to make the digital solutions on a very high level available for all aspects of life. We launched the so-called Jedlik plan, which is the electric car program for the country. We very much believe in this program also, and of course a very clear industrial development program in the sectors that we believe we are most competitive in. So I think these are very important elements of the increasing Hungarian competitiveness, and of course the measures that we have been and we are introducing, or we have just launched from this year on, is a very massive push for further increasing the competitiveness of the Hungarian economy. Oops, that's what I wanted to avoid, because thank you so much for your attention so far. What I believe we have seen in the Hungarian economy's case in the past 6, 7, 8 years is a very fundamental change for a stronger competitiveness, a stronger economy, an openness towards the international business field, making Hungary a solid economy in Europe and in the Central European region in particular. This is the sort of the very clear positive story. If you can take this off and go back to the map, I very much appreciate. Thank you so much. Because what we have seen is that this economic growth is obviously a very strong foundation for the security and stability of the country. Because on the other side of our priorities, the foreign policy and global security challenges, what we have seen and witnessed over the past few years, really call for a very strong, very powerful new thinking. And as we consider ourselves a country of inventors and inventions, we very much believe that we have to take very seriously these new global challenges, which are pressuring Europe. And in this, I would like to sort of focus on 3 main challenges that we see in Europe. One, and from Hungary definitely, but through this European broader perspective. One is definitely the transatlantic challenge. That I think is a fundamentally important, and we have some fundamental lessons from the past that we have to learn and have to understand. A second is a challenge in Europe that is itself is explained in the outcome of the Brexit vote. How come that such a successful international cooperation as is the European Union, which we have really fought for, which we really put a lot of energy, thinking, finances, resources, everything into making it a success, still is becoming unattractive for one of its very important members? And third, the last challenge that I think I would like to talk with you about, because we have to face and we have to develop answers, is this massive migration challenge that Hungary is facing a very special aspect of. So first, the transatlantic challenge. What we have seen over the past few years, 2.5 decades of sovereignty and democracy since 1990, is a very interesting development. Of course, at the beginning of the 1990s, I myself was just starting to work there. Then I was working in the Ministry of Defense. So, not only was that ministry staffed with the Soviet military, Soviet-trained Hungarian military, But of course, the whole infrastructure and everything was very, very much, inherited from the Soviet pressures in the communist times under a lot of pressure. We were very much supporting and wanted to join the NATO as an alliance, and we very much believed in it. I myself was giving a lot of speeches in the country to convince Hungarians to vote in the referendum for membership in NATO. And there was a lot of enthusiasm, and there was a lot of common values, common interests, common desires, common hopes. It was a very solid strategic foundation for the country's security. I was in the MOD. We were discussing whether it's neutrality, European Union military structures, or non-alignment, or NATO as such, or OSCE. So we were weighing all these options, and we decided for NATO. It was not, falling out of heaven. We made a strategic consideration, we made the pros and cons, and we came to this conclusion. A similar process took place in Washington, D.C. Whether NATO should enlarge or not, that was heavily discussed in Washington, D.C. as well, and the conclusion that we are much better off if we open up NATO and join, have the Central East European countries join NATO, was a solidly founded decision. However, what we have seen after the decades, and I think it was a big success, of course, was 1999, when NATO actually did open up and we did join NATO. And since I was working for the Prime Minister's National Security Advisor at the time, I was really seeing this as one of the big dreams of my youthhood, because of course I was brought up on Radio Free Europe, so for us NATO was the sort of ultimate target strategically for our country. What we could see is that our bilateral relations with Washington and the United States presence in the Central European region is not a solid thing. It's not something that is absolutely cemented in and means the same thing year after year. There are periods of American foreign policy where the commitment, the presence is stronger, is heavier, is more clear, where you can really rely on working out common projects, and there are periods when the United States has lesser attention in the situation of the Central East European countries, and where we are not able to draw the necessary support for our projects or work together on common issues, which I think is perfectly normal seen from here. But seen from Central Europe, where you have this massive big neighbor on the east, who is solidly there, you can be absolutely sure that Russia is there. It's not going to move, it's going to be there, it has been there, and there's a very clear manifested interest of theirs that you can sense in the region. The imbalance is striking. And I think that is one of the phenomena that we had to learn over the past 2.5 decades, practically, how to work with NATO, how to work with our partners when the concrete projects may not be of the same relevance, importance, or priority for us on the two sides of the Atlantic. That is one of the biggest challenges, I think, that remains so. And I think when we take a look at the current challenges, especially of the past few years in Hungary and in Central Europe, what we can see is that these challenges have received very different interpretations. Especially Hungary received a lot of hot and cold, but I think more cold than hot in this past few years. So I think we have had a very rough media relationship over the past few years. But partly, I think this can go back to assumptions that are not relevant in the region. So when you sit in the Central East European part of the world, your understanding of the reality is a little bit different. And that, I think, is very important for us to understand when we talk about our relations. The second big issue that I think we have to understand clearly is what is happening in Europe. Because that's definitely, I had the feeling I've been coming to Washington, D.C. since 1990. I remember the jokes of the Pentagon in the early 90s, and it's been really a fantastic period to negotiate through Hungary's membership in NATO. But more or less, the European Union as a construct was presented in the American media as a perfect thing. It's working, it's functional, there's no big issues, it's done, no challenges, no problems, no pressures. Whereas seen from the inside, as we have seen after having joined the European Union, the situation was very different. What we have seen is that there are a number of issues that don't work well, in which the Commission and the Council don't agree. The question, is it too bureaucratic, or shouldn't be more strategic, is not clear. The decisions are not on the right place. And some of the common decisions are so much counter the interest of various nation states that you just can't proceed with them. But when we were trying to raise those issues on a common sort of platform to tackle them and to try to find common solutions, oftentimes we got the criticism that it is really undermining the European Union. Well, I think, far from it. The intention was the very opposite. The intention was to make it stronger and to make it more efficient and to make it more operative. But it's very difficult to make changes in an institution that is seeing every criticism or every modification proposal as an attack against the whole. I think this is one of the important lessons of the Brexit decision. Because what we have seen in the case of Brexit was that the British population, the electorate, through the political leadership, was suggesting a number of changes inside the European Union. We very much agreed with the Brits on many occasions. So Hungary and Britain was on very many occasions on a very similar platform. But the resistance of Brussels to these changes was so profound that after a while, I think, no wonder that some electorate may think, if we can't change, if they don't listen, then we have to be out. And I think this is a wrong conclusion, but this is a reality. This is not, we cannot have, high standards of expecting nations to support institutions which don't respond to their needs and to their priorities. So while we believe that the Brexit decision should be used as a wake-up call to the rest of the European Union countries to, yes, we do have to make some profound changes in the functioning of the European Union, this is not the lesson that is drawn in Brussels. So I think we have reason to be concerned about how to go forward, because we do have to understand the priorities of the public. And the last one that I thought, the last big challenge that I thought of briefly outlining today is, of course, the challenge that has been hitting Europe since the January 2015, and that has been dominating the European political discourse ever since. Can you get the next slide for me for this among the maps? Yeah, thank you so much. Because what has been happening is a massive migration that started in January 2015. The first half year, as we were raising the situation, we were seeing how much the figures were increasing of people coming to the territory of the European Union. Without any passports, without any documentation. You would call them illegal migrants because they were not having their identification documents, was massively increasing, and there was no reaction from the European Union side. There were two major routes. One is the sea route through, you can see through the Mediterranean Sea, and the other is the land route that was coming from Turkey through Greece, Serbia, and arriving to the European Union territory again in Hungary. Again, I said, because of course legally the first entry point for these people who were walking into Europe was really Greece. And so according to the European Union regulation, what we should have been seeing is Greece registering these entrants, making sure that they file their asylum request or a migrant request or whatever legal status they are requesting, and the European Union processing and responding to this. This is not what was happening. They just walked through Greece without any registration, without any response by the authorities to the needs of these people, and arriving to Hungary as again a leaving the European Union territory after Greece, because Serbia is not a European Union member, but then arriving back to the European Union border at the Hungarian-Serbian border in the south of Hungary. And unfortunately, this is the point where we were really facing just bad choices. There is no good solution in this situation. Because what you are supposed to do as a country or as a nation that has sympathy and that understands how tough it is where they are leaving from, you have to just let everybody come in. But when you're letting everybody come in, what you're facing is a tough European Union regulation in which it says, this is what the regulation requirements are. This is what Schengen and Dublin agreements prescribe to all the nations. If you don't do that, you will be excluded from the Schengen area. The Schengen area in the European Union is the part where you can travel without passports. So from Hungary to Portugal, from Poland to Great Britain, you could travel without passport. You can travel without passport because of these two agreements, the Schengen and the Dublin agreements. The problem is it's very important on the personal level, obviously, but it's even more important for commerce and trade. These trucks otherwise would have to be stopped at every 5 hours with the next border, and with the Schengen and Dublin agreements, they can go very fast and smoothly. So it is a fundamentally important element of our economic decision and business decision making. But if we tried to do the registration as prescribed by the Schengen and Dublin agreements, we were facing the lack of cooperation on behalf of the vast majority of these people, because they had a target country in mind. They wanted just to cross our countries. We were really wrong in thinking that they will want to register when they come into the European Union. We were setting up, for instance, refugee centers in various parts of the country, not simply to provide shelter and food and medication to these people who we saw arriving to the European Union territory, but we even set up Arabic language schools, because we thought that the process of filing their migration and refugee status was going to take a little longer. In the US, it often takes 2 years to go through the vetting process. Well, we have nothing as serious as the vetting of the American vetting in the European Union context, but we still have a registration process, and we thought it could take half a year, maybe. So we were offering Arabic language schools for the children who we supposed were going to stay in Hungary. This was not the intention of these people. They just wanted to cross the country, and their target arrival country was Germany and Austria. So they felt that we were holding them back, that we were not responding to their needs. And then we were under the pressure of the European Union. If we didn't comply with the Dublin and Schengen agreements, we were clearly said to be closed off from the Schengen area, which would have been disastrous for the Hungarian economy. So I think as a result of these competing pressures and inability or impossibility of finding one good solution, what you have seen is a massive struggle. The number of people who came through the land route into the European Union just in 2015, so through Hungary, is 391,000 persons. If you compare it with in population ratio, it means as if the United States had, in 1 year, 12 million illegal entrants without passports, practically. I mean, that's just the pressure on the administrative structures. It's a massive number of people who has to go through the registration process. And of course, the internal pressures of how to handle that by the European Union pressuring us on one side, the migrants pressuring us on the other side, economic, political, strategic considerations all coming into the picture. What is very clear, I think, that we have to establish some priorities. And one of them is border security, which was absolutely the precondition. It's not solving any problems in the long term, but it's solving the one problem of securing the border of every country, which is, of course, the prime responsibility of any government. So that's what we had to do first. But secondly, we also were trying to establish a longer overarching policy project, how to tackle the migration pressure. And one of this was to increase the budgetary contribution of the European Union countries towards those countries in the region, in Turkey, Lebanon, and Jordan, where the massive numbers of refugees were staying, because we said no one can expect these countries to tackle those pressures. We also proposed that we have to work closely with Turkey to be able to solve the situation in the longer term. We also proposed that every European Union country has to increase our contribution to the fight against ISIL, because definitely that's the root cause of the whole problem. But obviously what we have seen is that this is a problem that is really much larger, because through the registration process, what we have seen and what we have received is a set of data that no other country has in Europe, I think, at the moment. We have, for instance, proof of, where these people are coming from, what are the countries that they're coming from. And what we have seen is that over the past 2 years, these the entrants are coming from 104 countries. So it's not a Syrian refugee crisis. It's a lot more complex. The portion of the Syrian population in this entire 2-year period is not more than 1/3. The rest is coming from countries like Pakistan, Bangladesh, Afghanistan. A lot of people coming from the sub-Saharan Africa obviously have nothing to do with the Syrian crisis. So, and obviously there is not war in 104 countries. So the pressures, the motivations are a lot more complex. A large part of it is definitely the Syrian crisis. That was like the first trigger, probably, or the last bit in the whole movement to start. But then it has become a massive, massive different thing. And if we only focus on what the media is suggesting, that we have to solve the Syrian refugee crisis, we're dead wrong. And I think that would be a big mistake for all the political decision makers to commit. So we have to, without data, how would you know that? How would we know that the situation is so different? So what we have to do is to have to understand the reality and try to work on the proper solution that correspond to the realities and the pressures of the reality. This is not a cheerful note to end on. So I'm not ending, I'm just opening for questions, if that's okay. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Ambassador, for really a superb presentation, and love that contributions of Hungarians to. I think most of us learned a lot on that. Got many questions. I'll try to characterize them here. How will decisions, especially elections in France and Germany in 2017, impact on Hungary's domestic, EU, and broader foreign policy? That's it.
Thank you so much. Well, of course, it's very difficult to predict the future. We in Central Europe are struggling with predicting the past as well, so it's not an easy thing. But what we have seen in Europe is partly as a result, I think, of this massive pressure that we have just talked about in the last bit as a third challenge, is really the response to the massive migration pressure on the continent. What we have seen is that in those countries, especially where the political elites were not able to respond to the public's internal pressures and needs, there is a massive shift towards the radical right. And that, I think, is a problem. That can be a problem in Europe, definitely, coming to influencing the political decisions or the electoral decisions of these countries. But even if there's not a very massive sort of radical right government coming in, like in France, and there is the hesitation. I think it's not Marine Le Pen at the moment who has the best chance to win the elections. The increase of the support behind that radical political forces is very clear. What we have seen is that in the case of Hungary, because of this very clear and very focused response of the political leadership, we don't see an increase of the support of the radical right. So I think, although there are trends that are competing and it's difficult to see, it will definitely have an impact on the domestic political setups of these countries. I hope these pressures will be pressuring the political elites to develop the right policies for the real problems, and not to continue to live in a very sort of made-up fantasy problem, which has nothing to do, or has very little to do with the reality.
On several questions on your assessment of the future of the European Union, understand that your currency is not you don't have the euro, but how do you see the European Union's near-term future with all these strains? And if the European currency does go south, how will that affect your country?
Well, the joining to the Eurozone has been a massive question for all the political all the governments in Hungary since joining the European Union, and it has been an issue that we very much believed in our own first governmental term in my government. We very much believed in the need to join the Eurozone. So we were very much working on this, and in 2002, when we lost the elections, Hungary was predicted to be the #1 country to join the Eurozone in terms of its capabilities and financial readiness for this change. Successive government who came in after us was having different policies, and so this possibility declined and evaporated into a very long, distant future. Which turned out to be for the benefit of the country, because after the 2008 crisis and the massive internal strategic structural changes that we had to introduce in the Hungarian economy, it gave us more flexibility, definitely. So when you are in big trouble, I think one of the problems in the situation of the Greek economy is exactly they're being tied up to the euro, and that's influencing very much, of course, the political decision-making possibilities of the governments. I very much believe that the situation, what we have seen in Europe over the past decade, just shows the difficulties and the internal tensions of the Eurozone countries. And so we're not thinking at this stage that these difficulties are going to disappear or that they will be easier. I think we will have to face very strong tough internal questions on the future of the Eurozone. And it is going to be just further increasing those internal pressures that we're having in the European Union. So that there is although Hungarians are said to be a very pessimistic nation, which is just realism, I think, in our case. It's just realism. But for the future of the Eurozone, we have reason for our realism.
Question, you mentioned that in Hungary what matters is who you fight with and where you put your money. Who does Hungary fight with, and who is it worried about? Simple question. Great
question. Well,
you're a tough audience.
Great. You're a great audience. I think it's a great question because I'm a security policy person, so I'm always very happy to tackle issues of security. And I started to work in the Ministry of Defense in 1990, and I said that although we may join the NATO, but for Hungary to contribute to any NATO military operation, not in my lifetime. Because I was in the Ministry of Defense, I saw the situation. What we have seen is an immense change, and as a result of this, we're there now in every peacemaking operation and peacekeeping operation in many places of the world. But the most important contributions that I'm really particularly personally and professionally very proud of is our contribution to the fight against ISIL. Where in portion of Hungary's population, we are contributing to the largest extent among the Central East European countries. We have a good force in the north of Iraq of 200 people, special operations, and I'm very proud to say that I visited our guys there, and I'm very proud to see that they have the appreciation of the American forces on the region in the field. So I'm very proud and very professionally very happy for seeing this cooperation between the Hungarian and the U.S. Special Operations. And we're there in Afghanistan, and we also said that we're going to be the last ones to turn off the light together with the United States. So we'll be there because we're really strong allies. But that element, I think, is very important for our bilateral cooperation and also our strict security and stability in the long term, because we're very committed NATO partners. We're also committed to increasing the share of the defense budget as NATO countries, as we agreed to the 2% level, which I think is a very fair and very clear expectation from among all the member states of the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. And the other question is who we are most concerned of. Well, I think at this stage, what we have seen in Hungary, over the past 26 years of freedom and democracy and free elections and sovereignty coming back to the country is that we have to be able to develop a very pragmatic relationship with Russia. That has to be very pragmatic, very much to the point, very clear, because there's a lot of dependencies that we haven't managed to overcome. Right in 1990, the Comecon, we don't even remember what that was, but that was the economic part of the Soviet system in the world, collapsed within 24 hours. Also, Warsaw Pact, the military part of the Soviet system, collapsed within 24 hours. The one part that did not collapse and that continued to influence our daily political decisions is the energy import sources and the energy import lines. And we continue to live on the same energy infrastructure that was built in the 1970s by the Soviet Union. And I think that is I was doing a lot of work on energy security, and I was very much involved in practically all four major projects in which we tried to have a gas-to-gas competition in the region. We very much believe that it's okay to be supplied by Russia if there is a non-Russian gas also in the region and there is a real competition situation. But for that, in the case of natural gas, you need infrastructure. So we were having four major efforts to establish this gas-to-gas competition. All of them failed. I was part of all four projects, so if you take a look at my CV, no one's going to hire me. But I think it just shows the difficulties that we are facing, even in a region that is so closely aligned, that has such a strong strategic interest in cooperating, that we have not managed to get out of this system. So yes, we have to keep an eye on our big eastern neighbor and have to make sure that our relations remain very pragmatic. Of course, we are interested in having a pragmatic cooperation between Russia and the rest of Europe, and Russia and the United States as well. We also understand that it takes two to tango, so it's a complex situation. But the long-term interest is definitely to try to shift all of these relations and make sure that we're inducing all of the involved partners into this very pragmatic, very sort of cooperative relationship.
Excellent. Several questions on anti-Semitism. Can you speak to the rise of anti-Semitism in Europe and around the world, and what is Hungary doing to stop this?
I think it's a very important question because Hungary is the country in the European Union that has the largest inborn Jewish community. And this is really a great treasure for the country. They have been living there for centuries, and I think we have of course, history was not kind in Europe, absolutely. So I think we have a lot to learn from and a lot to keep in mind. But that is why we very much believe in focusing on these challenges, especially over the last 2 years, when there was this massive number of migrants. A large majority of them were, of course, coming through Hungary. And of course, one of the big railway station, for instance, where they were stationed before they went to Germany, is about a 10-minute walking distance from one of the most beautiful Jewish districts in Budapest. The most beautiful Budapest synagogue is really a 10-minute walk. But we managed to make sure that throughout these 2 years, despite the over 400,000 people that went through Hungary, there was not one incident against the Jewish community. And there was not one challenge that was raised, and that the Jewish community in Hungary can go into the synagogues without going through a metal detector, which is not possible in France, for instance. So what we have seen is that you have to be very clearly focused in political decision-making on this priority. What we have seen in Europe, unfortunately, is that a new kind of anti-Semitism is appearing in many places, that sort of the Middle Eastern type of anti-Semitism. There have been problems of anti-Semitism before as well. The wave that is increasing now is not the so-called traditional, unfortunate, but not the European style of anti-Semitism. It's a new one. And I think that is a real problem that if we don't focus on, we're going to make a big mistake. So for instance, as part of our policy effort, we strengthened our ties with Israel. And we have never had such an intensive cooperation and discussion with Israel, and I think we're having, hopefully, a strategic cooperation that will help us to understand how to handle those crises, those tensions. Those are absolutely new in the European context, but not something to underestimate.
Unfortunately, we've run out of time, Madam Ambassador, and thank you for a superb, I think, join me in thanking the Ambassador for a superb presentation.